Well, hi, I'm Brandon Monday, and I'm a recovering evangelical and conservative. And I started deconstructing and reconstructing my faith in 2021. So for the last few years, I've been rethinking a lot of my personal, spiritual, and political positions. And this podcast is where I explore the various topics and their impact on the church and the nation. I'm happy to be back behind the mic today. I took a couple of weeks of vacation before a new job that I'm about to start, but I'm back. And today I'm bringing you a three-way conversation that I hope you'll find useful. So I've been talking to Andy and Paul for a while, and the conversation has been fascinating, and we thought it would be interesting to bring that to the camera. So Andy Luiten is a licensed clinical professional counselor working in internal family systems, or IFS, and we had an interview about IFS back in episode number 150. He continues to catch me with his deeply insightful and sometimes pithy comments on a wide range of topics. Paul Patterson is a former or maybe recovered pastor and a newly published author, and his book is titled The Son of Man and Its Mystical Awakening. And in it, he writes about faith and science and nihilism and globalization and how they're all converging in our time. And we've recorded a series of, I think, 6 podcasts together on the book's topics, and we're going to continue talking about that in future episodes. So, like I said, recently, Paul and Andy and I started talking with each other about what's going on in our society and the world. And this recording seemed like a good opportunity to continue the discussion. And we've got some topics we hope to hit today, but this is going to be pretty unscripted. So let's get into it and see where it goes. So,
I'm excited.
Andy, why don't you kick us off with a brief personal introduction? I kind of framed it for how I see you, but how do you see yourself?
That's a good question, actually. I would have a hard time answering that beyond like what you said, because like I think about it so on so many different levels. But doing IFS therapy, and also a musician, and music producer. So those are like the things that I love to do. I'm also a huge Star Trek nerd. So those are like the big 3 passions of my life right now. Well, no, there's more, but
There always are.
Always are. But yeah, I guess that's part of, what I find joy in. And so
that's cool. And Paul, how about you?
Yeah, I'm a recovered pastor, I think is what I've been saying recently. And, I do development and marketing consultant as my main gig during the day, and during the morning, nights, and everything in between. This spiritual stuff from Bible to psychology and philosophy has kind of been my world. And I've released a book on it, and now it's kind of another chapter of life that it feels weird, man. That's me.
So I think the overarching topic that I kind of wanted to touch on today, and I titled this tentatively something like The Collapse of the Church in America, because I think our conversation was really focused on this idea of, oh my gosh, what has happened? How do we go from what we grew up with to this? And, from what you just said, Paul, I want to ask a specific question to start with. Do you have what you would consider a flock as a pastor, or is this purely something in your past?
I'm going to answer that question with a couple stories. When I fell into alcoholism and everything fell apart, there's just a lot of shame and guilt in that. And on this side of recovery, as I was getting back into things, one of the things I became aware of about 18 months, 2 years ago, was like all my avoidance patterns. And I was really sick of tired of being stuck where I was at. And I was aware of all the things I had to use, like the gifts and the knowledge. And so when I dove back into everything, I decided to face everything I was afraid of. I found myself doing a lot of the same church planning and pastoral things I was doing in my marketing and development. I'm trying to teach people the same stuff I was doing as a pastor, but now I've also learned through mental health and cognitive behavioral theory and IFS and just multiple other things. So when I was being interviewed last year by Shane at the Good News blog in Australia, his article said, "My method of church planning feels like gardening. And it caught me so off guard that he said that, because I had in nowhere in my mind was I viewing myself as a church planner or but he like called something out to me. And then a bit after that, I had a spiritual moment. I was walking in my living room, and out of nowhere, I kind of had this, "You're Jonah." Like, it was from the right side, and it stopped me in my tracks. And I didn't want to run. I can feel it a little bit. I didn't want to run away from the moment. And I just realized everything I had been working towards and had put me back in some kind of pastoral function in the world. And I needed to get over the imposter syndrome if I was going to do it right. So I think you can take the church out of the pastor, but you can take the pastor out of the church, but you can't take the church out of the pastor in some sense.
One of the things I've been thinking about for some time now and blogging a lot about is how the institutional church model has failed us, and how we need to recover some kind of a more personal, intimate, and I think we'll touch on this a lot more today. But somebody like you who actually has grown groups of people together is interesting to me, because there's a lot of people that I connect pretty deeply with locally, but turning that into something that resembles a community is very difficult. And so, that's one of those challenges that I think sounds like you've got a handle on doing that I've never figured out.
I have a handle on doing, and then I was, as a person, was trying to like I had a rule that I think I'm allowed to let go of now, but it was there for over 4 years in AA, where I don't share, because I was aware of the proverb that where words are many, sin is not absent. And I know how to use my tongue, and I know how to, get to influence a crowd and to put on a performance. And I know for me, like, there was a lot that I had to figure out. And along the process of figuring that stuff out, I think, I can help build a community, but it's really hard to build a community when everyone's afraid of everyone else, And when you want to do something authentic when it comes to faith and scripture and Bible and theology, that's dangerous today. And for someone like me, I think it was definitely part of what broke me, being a church planner and having all the responsibility on me. Was like, you want me to build the church of my vision? Like, you don't know what you're asking. Like, I can't do that. You guys would never let me. And so now I feel like it's been 7 years since I went to my first rehab, when my church elders and my ex-wife, and they had their intervention with me. And now I'm oddly in a very similar position with other people who get the same things we're talking about, but I'm trying to, do my amends and, connect with family and learn how to be a good friend and, how to pay bills and do budgeting again, while I'm building these relationships around me of people who want the same thing. And it's like, okay, well, let's do it then, because I'm tired of waiting.
So, let's touch on where we came from spiritually then, because I think that plays into how we see what's going on in society with these issues with churches and groups of people. And I think my sense certainly is that the idea of church in the Bible was very different than ours today. So I grew up in an evangelical community that was probably a couple hundred people in size. The first church I went to that I remember being very particularly important to me had probably 300 people in it. It was a largish room. And we had a home group that we had meeting in our house, mostly in our house, but other local families, because we were 45 minutes away from church. And so the local community gathered a home group together, and it was very robust, probably with all the children, probably 50 people. And so our house was packed every Friday night for several hours in this deep, deep, deep community. It had its problems. There were some leadership issues. There were some challenges between the men of the group who was going to be in charge and who wasn't going to be in charge. But it was, from my perspective as a young person, a preteen, it was very, very robust, healthy spiritual connections. And then I spent 30 years in a very evangelical, very charismatic kind of a church that was fairly non-denominational, even though it was technically an Assemblies of God church. And so I grew up thinking about that being an institution, and
Mhm.
this is what defines a church, even though I understood that the church was larger than that. But my sense for all that growing up time was that what I experienced was a model for pretty much all of American churches, even though I didn't have any connectivity to, say, mega churches. I kind of felt they were outliers for the most part, but most people did kind of what I did. And so I had a picture that that was what church was. And so I had an impression that the, the formative unit of religious Christian experience was this couple 300 person group. And I should also point out that another factor in my, I'll call it upbringing, was that in about 1994, this whole cell church model exploded on the scene.
Yeah.
And our church jumped into that wholeheartedly and literally destroyed the existing small groups. By one of the aspects of the cell church is that we periodically multiply. You always want the cells to multiply. And so you have more and more cells, and then they bring in more people. But practically what that meant was that you have to divide the people into smaller units so that they can each then get bigger again. And then you divide those people. So we said a lot of things about it multiplying, but in reality, what it did was cut off those relationships. Oh, you can't be in this group with these people because you need to, make new room for new people. And so it destroyed our small group ministry. And that was, for the next 25 years, basically non-existent in that church. Some small groups of people, but that small ministry was gone. And so I deeply mourned that because I knew what we had lost, but I knew it was still out there in many other churches. So that was where my concept of church in the American sense comes from. How about you, Andy?
Yeah, definitely evangelical upbringing. And there were a couple different versions of that. Grew up in I think it's a Calvinist leaning church, but didn't really learn Calvinism from it. Then around age 16, we switched over to a non-denominational church. And then went off to college and found myself in, what church was I going to there? Probably a lot of Nazarene churches, which would still fit in evangelicalism. Then I went out to Los Angeles and I was in a Calvinist church out there. And that was when I really kind of got into Calvinism. And then over the years, slowly found my way out of Calvinism. Yeah, it was an interesting journey. I find it interesting to kind of notice the succession of Christian authors and thinkers that I kind of transitioned through as less and less orthodox or whatnot. So just find that kind of fun to kind of look at that progression. But I don't know, does that answer the question?
Sure does. And Paul, what about your background?
Yeah, I came to Christianity around 9th grade. By then my family was already blended and we had pounced around to a bunch of different churches. So I was already aware of non-denominational churches that were still denominational. That makes sense. Like the AG church you were talking about. And so I was just aware everything was kind of mixed. And so I was just going to be a Christian. And I adopted that frame really early on. I went to a restoration branch of a Bible college, which is Church of Christ, Christian Church, and Disciples of Christ. But they were definitely, on the Christian and conservative side. I went there. And while I was there, I was a middle school pastor at a Baptist church. My family, before all of that, we grew up in a little bit. We went to a Christian Missionary Alliance church. So after working at the Baptist church and graduating from Bible college, I went back to the Christian Missionary Alliance and was a pastor there for a bit. And when that fell apart, I managed restaurants a little bit, and then a restaurant for a little bit, and then became a youth pastor at another non-denominational church that had some connection to the Restoration movement, but they were a little bit further removed and had some flexibility doctrinally. And they were really animate about relationships and community. And in fact, they had developed a model about small groups called relational discipleship. And I'm pretty sure it's still active and ongoing. And I got tied into pretty close to that leadership structure and got to experience not just the training and being able to train people through it, but I got a taste for, a little bit what church community could be like, even within an institutional model a bit. But that church, had some independence where it could be a little bit more ground based. And that's good. That's kind of where I've been through. I've been thinking a lot about the AA model because that's kind of been church for me for the last few years.
So in the context of what I was hoping to talk about today, church and then culture and political stuff kind of have a continuity to them in that entire milieu. There's not a strong separation between what we think of as our church and what we think the nation should be in those cultures.
Right.
And I guess our distress, the three of us, as we've been talking, has been about how we seem to have, how that structure has lost its way in some sense. How are those things playing out in this season? Where did we go from, because I think if you asked most people in America, they would say none of those things have really changed. But I think for those of us looking with a non-conservative lens at what's going on right now, I think we say it's changed a lot. So has it lost its way? How has it lost its way? What do you think?
Have you guys read Jesus and John Wayne?
Yes.
No.
That's a really, what's that, Paul?
I've seen the book.
Okay. Yeah. That, I feel like that was really insightful and helpful for me to understand. And then after I read that, I kind of got on this kick of tracing the history of evangelicalism in America. And I read this book called The Evangelicals, and just kind of seeing how there was just this slow kind of movement of tying the conservative politics with the evangelical church. And there's just been kind of a whole history where it's been a slow cooking transition. It's not like there was a snapping moment where, now all of a sudden the church is completely different. It's just been kind of to quote Casting Crowns, a slow fade. To use that song in a very different context, but that's, I guess.
Do you think that the fundamentals of what we think of as Christianity, I mean, if we separate out this issue that we've been talking about of finding ourselves beholden to empire, if you set that aside, has the rest of it changed substantially, do you think?
Can you say that again? Or Paul, do you have a response?
If the premise of the question is, if we're comparing the church to the ideological, what it should be within scripture, like what we read there, and it's changed. It has changed a lot, and it's not what it was. But it's also been a long. Christianity was always horizontal in nature. It had leadership and it had accountability and all that. Yeah. It wasn't just chaos. It had organization and order. There were relationships and discipleship, but it wasn't just top down. It was always horizontal. And that was one of the reasons why Christianity spread so fast, so quickly, is because the language was horizontal. It cut across tribes. It cut across political parties. It actually took the political language, co-opted it, which was kind of funny because that's what happened. That's how the problem began in some sense. But it co-opted it, put it back on the person and within the locality of communities, and said, no, this is all our responsibility. We live out kingdom and empire within our own lives here on earth as we walk. And it's a lot to bear as a human, but that's been the historical call all along. And so Christianity was horizontal. It's not against top down or bottom up or other systems of organization, but it was never just a singular thing. And ever since the Reformation, that 1,000 years of Dark Ages, ever once the Greek scriptures and original manuscripts flooded back into the Western conscience, we've been deconstructing ever since. The Reformation was just the first part, well, not even the first part. We had the Renaissance, and then we had the Enlightenment. But I think what we're experiencing now is the real, like the nightmare before the real Enlightenment, before people finally wake up and kind of push through and find that wholeness that scriptures, that AA, that all the spiritual traditions have been pointing towards.
Let me riff off of what you just said and observe something. I think a characteristic of the early church was that it was appealing to people who did not have power. And then when the Romans got hold of it and turned it into the Roman state church, all of a sudden it became an arm of those who did have power.
Yeah.
And then while that was developing across the medieval and the Middle Ages periods, there was a sense, particularly moving into Europe, where it again became something for people who didn't have power, particularly the Protestant church. And then we move into America, and in the period of the American Revolution, there was a period where the people, in some sense, didn't have as much power as they wanted. And so again, they were rebelling in some sense against the English state church. But suddenly we're back in this epoch where the people that think of themselves as Christians also are the ones who think of themselves as being in control.
Yeah.
And so perhaps we're in that inflection point, like the early church was when Rome started getting involved in the mid 300s. And all of a sudden it became a state arm, and it was no longer attractive because people that were part of it were feeling empowered and given identity by their faith, as opposed to being empowered by the state. So maybe that was a tipping point back in the 300s, and it's a tipping point today.
Yeah. I mean, look, right. I don't know who you talk to, but you'll probably hear phrases like "what's going on out there," or like everyone talks about it from their own subjective context. They see it. They see the same kind of things. The world's quaking, but really, that quaking is happening within us, and we live in a state of globalization where there is no more land to claim again. And at the same time, AI and technology and all this information, and then it's flooding us. And I think it's exposing that. One of the things Kierkegaard, and I really appreciated his essay on this, he was talking about the idea of a Christian nation, 200 years ago. And he called BS on it back then, because he pointed out that, when Christianity started, it was the minority and it was the ground level. It was, I'll put my word into this horizontal movement. And in Kierkegaard's time, he was saying the same thing that I would think we should say today, is that's changed. The world is now flooded with Christians, and not just flooded with Christians, but flooded with Christian concepts. We can see that organizations are more Christian today than they were 1,000 years ago. I try to argue at the end of the book that even some of the pagan satanic things that are often stigmatized are more Christian now in a psychological perspective. And if that's the case, then all the tribes, all the masks, all the things that we've hid behind and found our security in, they're falling down. This is the apocalypse in many ways, the unveiling that's coming. Because somewhere along the line, and that happened around Constantine and before that, and the gospel got co-opted back again into this empiric. It was used to defend divine right of kings. It was used to defend legitimacy of heirs. It was used to defend, the national pride that people had. But it doesn't work, because if every nation adopt Christian nationalism, then we're going to be trying to conquer each other again.
Yeah.
We're at a point where scripture and logic and science are all screaming the same thing. I was watching something on the news, some comedian talking about the left and the right, and he was just bashing both, and like everyone was laughing. And the thing that I was getting away from it was how exhausted everyone is about the duplicity and the polarity, and just it feels like two parents fighting, and a bunch of people are caught in the middle.
Andy, bring in your IFS stuff here. Can you use something like IFS on a system like the American Christian culture?
The first I'll do IFS here. A part of me just spoke up and said, "I wish."
yeah. I was thinking where Dr. Dick would be, and like, oh, that. Like,
yeah. No. The thing is, and this is where like I'm not like my answer is not no, but it's like I don't know how to do that, and here's why is that. In order to, so in a polarization in IFS, there are two parts that are usually trying to accomplish the same thing, but in different ways.
That sounds like politics today.
And so what you do is you talk to them, you get into that place of what IFS calls self, of non-judgment and curiosity and compassion. And you really gain the trust of both sides and say, I'm not going to take sides here. I am going to, we're all going to sit down at a table together. We're going to talk about what your concerns are. What are you afraid would happen if we don't get to do it your way? And what are you afraid would happen if we don't get to do it your way? Then usually you'll find out you're afraid of the same thing. And then you point that out, and it usually brings a lot more respect and a sense of like camaraderie between the two. And then it's like, okay, so if I could quote unquote solve this fear for you, because usually what you find out is that I'm afraid that I'll feel ashamed, or I'm afraid that, I'll have some sort of overwhelming feeling that will be painful. And then it's the self has the power to heal that through compassion. So it's like, okay, if I go and take care of that for you, will you guys need to be fighting about this anymore? No. So that's like the depolarizing process in IFS. How do we take that to a broader scale? Well, the trouble I see is that in that IFS process, there is a trusted middle party,
a counselor, if you will.
Yeah, and I don't know how we get that on a broader scale.
Did that used to be the president?
Maybe I don't know.
Because the current president is certainly avoiding any sense of bringing.
Sure.
I think the people who idolized Ronald Reagan and certain other presidents, even Obama, I think, said a lot about their ability to get people to talk to each other and to join at the table. I think both of them had their problems, but I think they were recognized as being agents of unification at some sense. Even as his very identity was polarizing for both of those two,
right.
Reagan or Obama or whoever. I think there was good ability to bring different people together into a room. So maybe that's something that's been lost.
Yeah. I definitely think the president can fulfill some of that function, and it would be great if the president would.
I would.
But I'll say this: there's a certain key to people need to want to come to the table for counseling.
Yeah, there's like a pain threshold there that, which is something I worry about. Like it might take a pain threshold for us to get to finally wake up. But the other, right, there is no other middle person. We're so polarized that there is no one to say this yet. And I think this is what I'm trying to inspire people a little bit is like, there's enough of that middle that, we could, we in a big old capital W and E, like we could get to that credibility and that platform and be able to have that kind of voice but it would, we have to do it like trees. We have to do it authentically and do it whole. And that's the real hard part. When I have a personal development framework, I'm trying to get into like recovery and leadership and other things. And when I'm trying to sell it to like the business owner, the hesitancy that I see is more from them. Like they understand that this means they have to go deep. And one of my, I have a social worker who has 2 master's degrees, and she helps with schizophrenics. And she's looked at it, and she's a few decades older than I, and she was like, I need to get my crap together. And like that's the time we live in. And it's just, we're all really afraid of vulnerability, and responsibility still. And,
let me bring in a new concept here, because it might be useful. I'm sure you're familiar with the idea of a scapegoat.
Yes.
I read a great book, Scapegoats, The Gospel Through the Eyes of Victims, by Jennifer Bashaw a couple years ago. And she talked about how this concept of scapegoating is deeply rooted in Hebrew culture, and it fell then into the Christian experience with Jesus as the ultimate scapegoat. And I think if you look at what's going on culturally right now, we've become so polarized that there's this need to identify a group that needs to be sacrificed for the good of the nation. And so what formerly might have come to the table for negotiations, for counseling, and if we're talking about the IFS model, I think we have swung so far into polarization that the divide is so deep that now anyone on the other side of that divide from us is seen as the necessary scapegoat for
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
And Andy, when you were talking about, you said when polarization happens in IFS, I was like, I made sure to stop everything and really listen. Would you say that in that case, when that polarization happens, the self is the scapegoat? I'm just curious.
I would say, so polarization in psychology relates a lot to projection. So scapegoat would be like the one that the badness inside of you is projected onto, or what you perceive as badness inside of you.
Maybe more generally, is scapegoating happening within polarization? Because I think of my inner critic and my managers and my exiles and, the things I've had to, I wrote an article about having to wrestle with my Lilith, which is a witch archetype, and learning how to integrate that. And all along, there's been this projection, but also scapegoating. And for me, when I was still a youth pastor, I started teaching a series on atonement theories to my youth group, because that's normal. And I was a huge fan of Rene Girard then, who unleashed the scapegoat mechanism onto the world. We know what scapegoating is in many ways because of this man's work. And he also, he doesn't just frame the gospel in such a way that you can't see it any other way, but he frames it in such a way that, you see the tribal dynamic at play in American denominations. And you can even start seeing, if you've been in marketing, you've seen market funnels. And if you've ever read The Purpose-Driven Church, you've seen the market funnel. We're all kind of aware of this top-down performance, institutional, it's not right. And then we start getting aware of the scapegoating. And the scapegoating is what the gospel undoes. It doesn't just pull the brake, it absorbs the damage and starts living sacrificially in truth and love and boldness. It's not wishy-washy. It's not fuzzy. Sometimes it's fuzzy. It has no problem being fuzzy when it wants to be fuzzy. But it undoes the scapegoat mechanism, and not only that, it unwrites the monomyth, the hero's journey. It's the hero's journey in reverse. So every human, every society, every tribe, every mythology understands what the gospel is, which is why at the end of Revelation, it's every tribe, language, and tongue, every ethnic comes. at the end to finally see what the Christ is. And then after that, the Christ merges into God, into the rest of creation. It's like they become one and they cease to be, which I think is what Paul means in 1 Corinthians 15.
Yeah.
I got the sense that Bashaw in that book was telling us why scapegoating was harmful.
Mm-hmm.
And an interesting thing is that you can look at the gospel from two different perspectives. One is that it's the ultimate story of the ultimate scapegoat,
Mm-hmm.
right? Jesus. But she also points out how evil that concept has been and how it has been certainly horribly misused by the church to find someone to throw your sins on, to throw your harm and evil on and let them be the brunt of that thing. And so, in our culture today, trans people are the current scapegoats, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Someone got shot, must have been trans. So when you mention the gospel, Paul, I think you have to inspect that pretty carefully. And I guess the conversation that I've seen, at least on my social spheres, has been that we are living in a world now where we have multiple different concepts of what the gospel actually is. And so we have people that are quite happy to see immigrants, rounded up and harmfully beaten and abused and, fast roping onto the roof of an apartment building to catch some 2-year-olds and 11-year-olds, as opposed to those of us who look at the gospel and say, well, Jesus said to care for those people. And so when you use the word gospel right away, I think we're unfortunately in this bifurcated culture that we're in now, we have to stop and ask which gospel.
Well, and that's part of what gospel is meant to do. It removes the bifurcation. There is no bifurcation. Whether you eat or drink, you do it all. Yeah, well, and that's the radical nature of what was unleashed 2,000 years ago and we've lost. If
so
the
is
gospel
is that the problem?
It's part of the problem. There's some work coming out that I'm aware of. I don't want to dump it because it's not mine, but even within like the progressive and the social work and the advocacy world, people can adopt like this advocacy mindset where it becomes toxic. It becomes scapegoating. They actually start throwing people under the bus in the name of their good cause. As soon as the gospel mindset gets tribal, and then what happens is you get parties and you get groups everywhere, and no one can see that they're all stuck in their own little things. And this is part of, I think, of what we were talking about with that polarity and the bifurcation of what's going on is there is such and this rift started well before Trump was elected. I think it's what, in some sense, he capitalized on.
Yes.
I think in some sense, part of the complicity of the left is that they didn't have a narrative. They didn't have a plan, a purpose, a drive. They didn't have the spirit. They didn't have the community and the connections. They were too siloed in all their tribes and kind of all their all the identity things that they were kind of, and it was good because this was part of the American and deconstruction process that humanity had to go through. But while this was happening, this other, like that old scapegoat religion was still doing its thing. It's not that easily reduced, but I guess that's kind of my point, is that it's not that easily reduced and most people aren't even aware of it.
Mm.
Have we made the gospel about way more than it's supposed to be about?
Or too little? I don't know.
Why don't both of you answer that question? Because
yeah,
I'll preface what I'm thinking is that as you're speaking, I'm thinking, well, the gospel is the good news about what Jesus did for us. Everything else is my dogma overlaid on top of that.
Oh,
is that? I mean, tell me what you guys think. Is that appropriate critique or not?
Well, the question then becomes, what did Jesus do for us? And is that a dogma that you have to adopt about that?
So go ahead.
I don't know. I don't have a fully fleshed out thought on that, but that's just the contradiction that I notice of like, how do we get to a gospel that is not somebody's interpretation.
Okay, so let me poke on something you started with in your very second sentence of this discussion, I think, which was Calvinist.
Mm.
So you grew up, and I think I implicitly did as well, even though we didn't talk about Calvin much. I think this idea of the depravity of man, the whole tulip thing, right? This whole underlying idea of depravity, absolute depravity, more than that, that there is no good in people that Jesus didn't, bring to them, and that determines how we treat people. As I've watched how people are being treated today and dehumanized, it makes a lot more sense if you realize that a lot of the people who are doing that come from a background where they think, well, this person is worthless without having chosen or been, even if you want to, chosen might not even be the best word. If they weren't predestined to be the saved ones, then why should I bother my time with saving their bodies because they're going to hell?
Yeah.
So I think to your point, Andy, that underlying structure of what you think about all of this, the Bible story, plays into this question of what is the gospel.
Yeah. I've been, this might go in a different direction, but we can just swing back. But I've been really intrigued by this idea of connecting based on values rather than beliefs. And a lot of like evangelicalism is based on we gather together because we believe the same things, and then you have to form a dogma around that. Whereas connecting over values, you can get to those values through whatever beliefs you have, but you're coming to the same common ground of those values, of whatever they might be, of like human flourishing, or murder is wrong. I used to argue, and I still have friends that will, say like, oh, if we don't have, a moral framework of God, like how do we even like govern ourselves? Because, we can't really legitimately say that murder is wrong. Well, we all share that, or, the overwhelming majority of us share the belief, the value. Sorry. Yeah. That's how easy it is to say belief, but the value of murder is wrong. And so you can get to that through whatever belief you have, but like we can share that value and we can still come together.
Yeah,
it's interesting. Sorry.
I think it's tricky because Jesus certainly talked about values overwhelmingly, but then he threw in words like whoever believes, and all of a sudden right away we're off to the races of, oh, see, I'm right about that evangelical value of I believe the right things, therefore.
Do we know the right translation of that? Is that, Paul, do you know, is that a good translation?
The word, what's the word specifically?
Oh, I don't know. Belief, what Greek word is.
Value
belief. Yeah.
Belief. I'm going to get there.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to get there because I've been saving an idea. So here we go.
Okay.
Back to something Brandon said about, this is about what Jesus did for us. Or maybe it was Andy. My question to everyone, and I'll let's ignore the right and just go to the progressive left side. Do you believe it? Like, do you actually believe it? Because when it really comes down to it, it takes faith. Jesus was really clear, if anyone wants to be his disciple, that there's a way of doing it. And there's an initiation process, and it requires picking up your cross, not his cross. And I think the word's really clear about this. Like, it's not Jesus's cross, it's your cross. Mm-hmm. And then you follow him. And this pulls us into discipleship. And discipleship is a way of life. It's a modality. It's a worldview. It's a lot like AA, when a alcoholic who has his head too far up his butt, and that's about the only thing he's aware of. And so he puts himself with a bunch of other alcoholics to have figure it out. And they start working with him over time. It changes everything. But that's like a microcosm of what the discipleship Jesus called us to. And it requires dying to self. It requires ego death, and a lot of even what IFS is in therapy. But it requires also service. It requires actually doing community. It requires boldness. It requires, being willing to understand nuance and befriend your enemies. And I would suggest that the progressive church and that side of American Christianity is at like they are primed to have a revival like no one has ever seen. Like all the tinder is there, and it's just going to take a couple sparks, I think, and in part because they have an enemy on the other side that's so formal and so unified now that they have no option, maybe.
So let me answer your question a minute ago about what's the word for believe, and the word the Greek word is pisteuo.
Pistis. Yeah, pistis, that's the verb. Yeah.
So basically, the implications are from I'm looking in the Strong's Concordance, to have faith in or upon, to entrust. Yeah. So it's not even about what you believe. It's about
faith is not belief.
Yeah, it's about your commitment to a way of.
Yes, I have a blog post that is a Greek word study making this point that faith is not belief.
Yeah.
Especially the way we understand belief today. Faith is holding on to. Go ahead.
My pastor used to use the acronym THROB: trust, hope, rely, obey, and believe.
Just don't use that anymore today.
But the point is, they're all action words. They're not intellectual.
Yeah. It's we do what we believe. We are what we do, and it's just really hard to mean what it's just really hard to actually mean what you do and do what you mean. Yeah. And I think much of human life is learning how to do that.
So let me change directions a little bit here to take this to what I think is another good direction for a moment, and that's there's a lot of people who are seeing these challenges that we're discussing, and they're seeing them in lots of different ways. I've been reading The Tears of Things by Richard Rohr, and in that book, he spends a lot of time talking about the prophetic. And he released that book this March, I think it was. So it's a very current book from a very well-respected, I'll say Christian mystic monk. Yep. So he's got lots of interesting ways of thinking and ways of seeing the world, but he's talking a lot about prophetic and about where people are seeing things that are not right in the church in the season and speaking out on those things. And so, I think the next question I would like to poke at here for a few minutes is, okay, we see these challenges. What do or what can we hope to do about that? Because we're all I have a podcast here with a few dozen active followers. I'm not, pulling in casts of thousands. You've released a book, Paul, Andy, you're serving as a counselor. We don't have a lot of voice in that bigger sense, but what can we do? And one of the things that occurred to me as I was reading Rohr this morning was that most of the prophets in the Bible didn't really have much of a voice themselves. When you read their stories, it's not like they spoke their things and everybody changed what was going on. I think Jonah's the best example of a major change, and Jonah didn't even want that job. Mm-hmm. So the prophets that are celebrated in Jewish culture weren't basically as effective as we tend to think of, like, someone like Kat Kerr today on the hyper conservative right wing sense of, let's have 1 million YouTube followers, and this is what God told me when he took me into heaven last week.
Isaiah was pretty much a failure by those standards.
So what do we do to speak these things that we sense are wrong, and how should our internal mechanism be primed about that role? What should our thinking be about this call to say something's not right?
I wonder how much the prophets are less so for their age and more for reflection after the fact, for learning from, for future generations to learn from what happened.
Maybe a both and.
I hope so. I hope both.
Right. Jonah's an interesting case study, which makes an appearance in the book, about the role of the prophetic and the collective and what it's supposed to do, but also even like Jonah's death process in there. The role of the prophetic is interesting because it's being used a lot by people. At least that role, that title, that word, and
usually self-appointed.
Yeah, usually self-appointed, and I think that's part of even like the facade and the ego and the faking it till you make it and trying to capitalize on the moment. And I think that's some of what's going on. Is it's in the collective conscience, and so people are trying it, like they're trying to do it authentically, but it is what it is.
There's a certain cachet around that role.
Yeah, I think if people are going to be serious though about the prophetic role, then they have to be serious about atonement and Holy Spirit and themselves. They have to be serious about their own sin and really be really careful about the words they put out, because false prophecy is something to take be really considerate about. If we're aware of the dynamics of scapegoat that the gospel fundamentally undoes, then we have to make sure that we're not scapegoating on our own prophetic utterances. And simultaneously, we have to learn how to do it through the gifts of the Spirit. We have to learn how to be bold. We have to be willing to make statements that people aren't going to get for a long time. That, we might die. And I think this is even part of the call of faith and discipleship. You might die living this life out, and people may not get it until much, much later. And I think that's part of the resurrection of the dead. Like, you understand this is for the good of all. And you're not.
I would point to Dietrich Bonhoeffer as a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
He was largely without honor in his own culture.
Yeah.
He was speaking truth to power. He was willing to die and did die for what he believed passionately. And he really has had more of an impact 80 or 100 years, 80-ish years later.
Yeah, it's interesting, these prophetic voices that are coming up, like Kierkegaard and Jung, people that are being pulled from the past.
Yeah. I have a part of me that hates talking about myself or like advertising myself, but part of like what I've been doing is just trying to write out my prophetic thoughts in music, and like the Midwestern Confession band name is kind of my outlet for that. I've been trying to like kind of gather together biblical prophetic ideas and put them to the music, and so there's that. As far as like, what I'm doing, but
Jesus' command about being shrewd as serpents but innocent as doves really comes to mind here, taking that last part really seriously. And I know for me, full confession, I've had to do a lot of freaking work on understanding my serpent and getting that freaker, getting him under control, like, understanding him, getting him integrated, letting him know that, hey, you can calm the heck down. You don't have to snap every time, or like there was some thousands of lessons of learning this one biblical phrase that I was drawn to at such a young age and didn't understand why. But like we need to learn how to be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves, and to take the parable of the shrewd servant really seriously. Instead of just whining about the things going on, going into it and doing the work ourselves. And that's where the hard work and the responsibility comes in.
Let me postulate that part of the problem that we face might be an American psyche thing, which is that we want to make a difference. One of the things that is deeply rooted in American culture is this idea of being effective. And in particular, the conservative culture of, and I've observed this in several venues recently of, for example, I don't want to give money to welfare or a homeless shelter or something because I don't think it's going to change somebody's circumstance. They're going to just end up living in the shelter forever, or they're going to stay on welfare. And so I'm unwilling to, and you see that in a lot of particularly conservative responses, but even liberal responses to where's the best way to spend my money and my time. And when we're talking about something like the prophetic, I think people who get engaged in, I see something wrong, I'm going to speak, are doing it because they're hoping to change something. And I don't think a lot of change will come from that. I think maybe in some sense, the people who are speaking out are the remnant, and they're going to be, generally speak, they may affect a few people. They're probably not going to affect millions.
Yeah, we have to do it how Jesus did it too. It's not just the message; it's the messenger, it's the medium, it's the method. We can't win arguments and lose people. We have to do it the other way around: win people, and then we'll figure out the arguments, and we'll work through all that later. But let's stop being jerks and start trying to be a little kind. Love your neighbor as yourself is, I think, a mantra all of Americans need to be chanting.
So one of the things that I've seen come up a couple times in the last few days is how Gen Z is responding to what's going on in the world, and not just in America. There's a push, this article I read today about how Gen Z is responding to rising authoritarianism around the world, the tendency towards right-wing fascist ways of seeing the world. And certainly they are part of what's going on in relation to institutional religion and the thing we started talking about. And so I'm wondering, where will that lead? And is that some place that we need to be spending more of our energy?
I'm curious, Andy, about your perspective as a counselor.
I don't tend to see much Gen Z clients, so it's hard for me to.
Do you have parents of Gen Zers though? And could you conjecture from there? If I went
really,
first,
not really. No? I mean, go ahead and go, and maybe I'll come up with something. But
okay. When I was a youth pastor, and being trained in Bible college over 20 years ago, I was taught then that the internet and the social media and the youth culture is going to create fragmentation and distance from parents, and it's going to cause these things. And one of the things we were warned about then was that we'll be able to choose our own communities, our own tribes. And that was 20 years ago. And something I have noticed is that then has become a fact now. Like was what I was warned about then is now what is normal. It's, chosen families and distant families are spread apart, and like we've lost touch with our traditions and our histories and our stories. And I think part of what's going on with the younger generation is they're looking up from their young perspective at all of us up here, going, "You guys are a freaking mess, and we need something." Right. Yeah. And they want something to work. They don't care anymore in some sense. And what's real, what works. And I need some peace and I need some truth now. And I think for me, I think that's part of the psychological drive going on here with a lot of Gen Zers too, is they just see the hypocrisy. They see the fake, the facade, how busy everything is, and why is it so chaotic? And at the same time, everyone kind of has their apathetic, we're trying, we cycle through our routines and watch our TV shows. And, I think that's some of what Gen Zers are reacting to.
So Andy, before you respond, I'll just observe that, yes, we're stovepiped and siloed these days, but at the same time, the internet has given a worldwide opportunity for people to circle together and start seeing some things in common that we hadn't ever been able to as a global culture. But go ahead, Andy.
I wish I had something to add. I just, sorry.
No, in response to Brandon, I think we've lost the physical, relational, sustained relationships and sustained grounded family, and even how to do it in business and marketing. And we never really, I might be a little too verbose to say that we never really understood how to do it in church in America from the beginning, because we were always kind of working with a shuffled deck of cards, playing a different while we're trying to play chess.
Yeah, I do have something about that. Like outside of IFS, actually, a friend turned me on to this book called The Happy City, and it's a really fascinating book just about how the way our physical world is spaced out and created fosters disconnection, and we have to drive everywhere. and you don't just walk down the street and see somebody, and everybody, is living in their own place. And so like that's a part of, I think, what creates that sense of like, we don't know each other.
Yeah.
And we know each other through the internet, which then we can, we don't run into people that we disagree with, or if we do, we feel emboldened to, call them names and stuff because we're not actually with them. And we won't have to deal with them in the future. And so, and there's really interesting like examples of how when cities have tried to create a place where it's more about less about driving farther and more about connecting with the people that you're close to, it actually drives like positive outcomes on like people's happiness and stuff like that. So that's another angle that I find really fascinating.
So to wrap the discussion up, I guess I kind of have one final question. And in our pre-conversation chat, Andy, you push back on, not Andy, Paul, you push back on this, I think appropriately. And I'm kind of curious, I'm going to throw it out there. But one of the things I think is true generally of Gen Z is that they're abandoning the institutional church. And I think in the conservative world, that's seen as proof that we've lost our way in a different kind of a way than you and I here are talking about today. But are we coming up on a post-Christian culture? And if so, is that good or bad? And if not, is it good or bad?
Danny, did you want to say something before I get on my soapbox?
Well, depends on how you define Christian and how successful Christian nationalism is. Yeah. In a lot of ways,
are the Gen Zs right? Is I suppose one way to ask the question.
Right. About what specifically?
About walking away from that institutional faith or institutional faith practices.
I think I'll let you go, Paul.
Yeah, I think the institutional side of things is it's fundamentally changing. I don't know if we'll ever get rid of top down because we like organization and structure and things to work well, and we like civilization. But it's going to be redefined and probably inverted and flipped on its head. However that happens, that's going to take a long time to get to. So when I hear this question, I hear America only thinking about itself. Christianity is much bigger than us. If it's not done yet. I think the post-Christian it's a post-evangelical Protestant Christian. It's a post-American Christian. It's a post whatever that was before. We're kind of done with it. It all tastes and smells and feels the same now. And I think what people are like, it's something like 60% of Americans do zodiac and tarot cards and yoga and these other Eastern practices. I think we're reaching further back and trying to find something real. I think we're about to see Christianity like rebirthed in a way that we've never seen it rebirthed. And then the post-Christian time. The post-Christian time is coming because the church and Christianity and the gospel was meant to change the world. It was meant to change us. It was meant to change humanity and for us to get over our stuff. At one point, Christianity will have, in some sense, served its purpose, but it will never go away. That's why Jesus says that his words will always remain, because they will be part of us. It will be part of the collective conscience and the part of the psyche. We will have learned our lessons. We will have evolved through it. And now that vision, that's a vision that takes more than 200 years from where we're at now.
I'm curious. Have you guys heard of meta-modernism?
No.
It's a philosophy that's just kind of getting started now. I heard about it on Hunger for Wholeness podcast. So you've heard of modernism, and then there was postmodernism. Meta-modernism is after postmodernism. So it's kind of it's recognizing, okay, it's a lot of what you were saying, Paul, of like, okay, we've done the deconstructing. Now,
Yeah.
how do we put these pieces back together?
Yeah.
And so it's like trying to transcend modernism, I guess, but without like jettisoning the good aspects of it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in that way, I wonder if maybe instead of post-Christian, we go to meta-Christian. I don't know, but
I love it. I near the end of my book, section 7, I bring up Nietzsche's Übermensch, and I throw some stuff saying, yeah, he's wrong, because the Übermensch was already in Scripture. It was the second coming of Christ. It's the coming of the Son of Man. And I say, if we're able to grasp that here, we can actually start postulating what the third coming of Adam is. That there's a telos Adam coming, and I think even what you were talking about with postmodernism, I think we're seeing the same thing. Like we're digging deep. We're really wrestling with truth, and we're really wrestling with I think some of the postmodern assumptions that were really left hemisphere and really just really Western in thinking. Yeah.
So all that I'm hearing here is that in this season, we're having to re-understand or renegotiate, to use Dan McClellan's term, what we mean by Christian. In some very, very fundamental level, we're having to rethink, what does it mean to have a church? What does it mean to be the church? What does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? What does it mean to fit that into my culture and my context? And am I willing to change or not? And I think that's probably the thing that conservatives have always avoided, is any kind of remapping or rethinking. And I think progressives, by definition, seek to do that kind of remapping. And so you end up with this cultural clash between, this is the definition and we're going to stay there, darn it, versus maybe that's not right. Maybe that's not the way things ought to be. And I think it's unavoidable in this season to rethink. And that's the whole essence of deconstructing and reconstructing, isn't it?
Yeah, it was always about being anyway. I don't know how we missed it.
Yeah.
It was always about being. And
as opposed to what would you say?
Morals, ethics, law. It wasn't, it was like the fundamental spiritual and theological aspect was being, spiritual transformation of the soul, and then living that out within community, within the larger world that's at play. And we divided it. We got and like we compartmentalized all of it. And being the Christian walk is fundamentally about being. So
can I see if I'm getting you, but kind of do a rephrase? So like, instead of coming up with rules to enforce, what is, good, developing goodness inside of you, or channeling goodness inside of you from God to be that.
So if I understood what you said, right. What I just said was more like, rules they can be guideposts, and they can be, lessons. They become things that become internalized from within, but they're never.
The law was our tutor, right?
Yeah. I wouldn't know what envy was until the law told me to stop envying. And then I'm like, I'm not envying. Oh crap, I am. But now we've lived with that mystery already, and we've lived with the gospel for 2,000 years. And so what it used to be that cookie cutter rules based, here's the 12 unique statements in our doctrinal statement. And here's kind of the stance. And then here's our unspoken code about how to live. And you'll find out really quickly about how we vote politically. And this is how you date sexually. And this is, like there was all these other codes and things that were mixed into Christianity. It wasn't just faith in Christ. So you could become a whole person and find peace and freedom. That everything I just ran through is this outside kind of mindset, while everything I just finished with is this way. And I think we understand this now. Like we can all get this, and we can identify it, how it works. And maybe that's part of the gift and blessing that we live in our time, is that we don't realize just how many people have gone before us so that we can have this understanding.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap. There's a lot more room for discussion on these topics.
Oh, man.
I think we're learning that it's not simple and it's never going to be simple. It's not going to ever be the way it was. How do we live into that? And so maybe that's where we need to ponder these things moving forward. Thank you both for joining me today. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it was a blast.
I've
It was great
enjoyed
to
it.
meet you.
Yeah. To see your face. Yeah.
And we will continue to be in touch, I'm sure. So thank you guys. Stick around for the post-close discussion here, but we'll be talking again soon, I'm sure.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.